Toes could have gone right through it.
I'm glad we had so many people make it out. We're even counting as you came in. What are we at, like 40-ish? 40-ish, good. And we're also going to be on Zoom. Did you get it off the Spanish version? Because I can start speaking Spanish. Buenos tardes, señor, señorita. Oh, never mind. That's about all I have, yeah. I'm going to go and introduce our two speakers. The first one is Stephen Grainger, and this is Larry's son, Grainger with a rain and son. They told me to say that. So a little bit of the background, rainwater harvesting, efficient irrigation, trees, and tree care. They serve as the water conservation chair for Comal County Master Gardeners, correct?
Yeah.
Vice chair of a Comal Facility Steering Committee, so he's like a truck driver, right? Outreach co-chair for the Comal County Conservation Alliance, sorry. I've been blogging the wrong stuff lately. And Larry is the secretary of the Comal Trinity Groundwater Conservation District and El Presidente of the Bulverde Park Association. These guys have been giving these talks across the county, and we got him here today, so we're going to give us a little talk, and after that we'll have a little break, then we'll have our meeting, and we'll be out here. Take it away, guys. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dwayne. Well, hello, fellow Master Gardeners. It's been a while, and those of you who know me, I'll try to hold off on the puns and the jokes and stuff. I'm going to back off a little bit tonight and be more serious. But those of you who don't know me, I'd sure like to meet you tonight while I'm here. I know there's some new faces, and I've met some people already, but I haven't met you all. So thanks for being here tonight and fighting that torrent of a quarter-inch of rain that we got. I did the calculations for Lisa Berry a little bit ago that I only got a quarter of an inch, but that meant I collected 650 gallons of water. I'm sorry, 450 gallons of water. This is our new website. Larry just got this set up in the last day or so. We've been working with a temporary site, but now we have an official new name change. And the reason we use bees in our name will be obvious when he does his talk as I transition to him. We're all about changing some things about the county in terms of catching water and not being so reliant on the aquifer. And that's the gist of what I'm going to be talking about, and he's going to be enhancing that. We, as you know, we just said we got rain and sun, so if there is anybody by the name of Dirt here, we would like to get a third partner. And get right into it. What is causing our concern for water conservation is primarily growth. It's not what else can happen, although it's happening. Our water resources are declining across the state. Silt flows naturally into all of the reservoirs, and the bottom keeps getting closer to the top. And they don't add to the dam, they just keep getting less and less water in the lake. Not just Canyon Lake, but all the lakes in Texas. And you also see declining aquifers. Now, drinking water treatment, you're starting to see more facilities being built. There was a new one just announced lately for Hayes County and Guadalupe County off of the Guadalupe River, the Blanco River. And that water treatment plant will draw water from the river and then process it and provide it to the Kyle, Buda, San Marcos community area. So even the rivers are going to have a little more stress on them. Wastewater treatment is part of the answer. They're starting to build treatment plants where they can bring the water all the way back up to potable status. Now, it sounds a little distasteful, but I mean, that's what the astronauts have to deal with on the space station. Now, turns out that protecting our water supplies and having the resources available in the future The easiest and cheapest way to do that is to conserve water. And to conserve water means don't use all the potable water that's come into your house to water your outdoors. Obviously, we know that that's not the best choice of water. We're master gardeners, right? And we were surprised to learn this. Larry and I went to the Texas Water Development Board Water for Texas conference back in September, and we found that there's a lot of confusion about how to value water when you're making economic decisions about wastewater treatment plants, water treatment plants, and so on. But to us, the citizens that live in the county, we each have our own idea of how important the worth of the water is, especially if your well runs dry. It's happened to me. How many else have had that happen? Happened to me during the great drought of 2011, but then they fixed it. Now, we can increase the supply of water. Oh, sure, we can go out and dam up some more rivers in places, right? Well, there are only 5 sites left in the state of Texas that can be done. And 3 of the sites have already been voted down by the communities that said, we don't want our farmland flooded. We don't want our hunting woods flooded. We're not going to accept it. So there may be 1 reservoir that can be added. That's it. So you can reduce the demand for the water. That'll ensure your supply. Well, it turns out that industry is helping us. The declining size of the toilets, you can see that toilets and clothes washing and washing machines for dishwashers, they're all going down. I recognize that. That's my wife calling. So you can see the trend is that industry is trying to help us out. And they're doing a pretty good job of reducing the demand on our daily life activities. I often talk about the fact that I keep a 5-gallon bucket in the shower. So when we turn on the water, when we first start showering, that's where the water goes until it gets warm enough. And then we use that water to water houseplants and water the dog and that sort of thing. So simple things can help save water. It turns out the state of Texas has a program that was sanctioned by the legislature about 25, 30 years ago, where every year they update a plan. It's a 5-year plan. They take 5 years to develop it, and it looks ahead 50 years. And so they just finished this last one. They call it the 22 plan, but it's actually based on 20 statistics, and they're looking out to 2070. Well, what do they think is going to happen in this state of Texas over the next 20 or next 50 years? 70% increase in population and a 17% in water demand. And that is an increase of about 11.5 million acre feet. And I'll get to acre feet in a little bit. Those of you who know me know I'm an engineer and a mathematician, and so I throw numbers out, but I guarantee I'm going to guide you with the big numbers. It's hard to imagine numbers on the scale that we're talking about. They're going to spend over the next 50 years $125 billion across the state putting in pipelines to transfer water from one basin to another, to putting in flood control, to putting in water treatment plants. These are made in terms of loans to municipalities across the state. Now let's get more specific with Comal County. It says we're going to increase 134% from 153,000 up to about 358,000. Well, they're lowballing it at this point, because if you read the articles in the last couple of weeks in the Herald Zeitung, the census, the 2010 to 2020 census, we're way ahead on that rate. And that means this is conservative, very conservative numbers. It says we're going to double our water consumption here in the county. How are we going to double the water consumption? Well, there are going to be that many more people taking showers, watering grass, doing all those things. And of the $125 billion that are earmarked for the next 50 years, so far less than $5 billion are dedicated to our region. And I have to tell you, our region includes San Antonio. And you know more of the money will be spent there than here, only because of the scale. So what's our rainwater harvesting potential? In our county, we get about 34 inches of rain. It's sometimes debated, it's 32, it's 34, it depends on which agency you talk to. But in all of the state, there's only $41.4 million targeted right now for rainwater harvesting in the entire state. Out of that 125 billion, only 41 million. And guess where that's going to be spent? 69% of it's going to Hayes County, and the other 31% is going to Travis County. Nothing here. And why? Well, I took a course over in Seguin, Texas a few years ago in grant writing. And this is the ultimate kernel of that entire class. If you don't ask for it, you won't get it. And we're not writing grants, we're not writing proposals to do rainwater harvesting in this county. I'd like to see that change. And we're kind of cordially nudging people along to kind of get on our way of thinking. So, excuse me, what's an acre foot of water? Well, you all know what a football field looks like, and from the 9-yard line all the way to the end zone line at the other end, from side to side, that's about an acre. And if an acre foot means it's got 1 foot of water on it. And 1 foot of water will take care of 5 people for a year. That's a lot of water. Canyon Lake holds 125 billion gallons of water. And the thing that struck me when I worked up these numbers was, oh my gosh, that's $1 for every gallon of water in the lake that the state's going to spend on infrastructure development over the next 50 years. $1 per gallon out of Canyon Lake. Well, that 382,000 acre feet is still a hard number to imagine. So we're going to use it like a spoon. We're going to say, okay, we're going to measure everything in canyon lakes. If you had a Big Dipper and you could hold the whole lake. The first thing I want to show you is on a scale of water consumption in the state, how big is Canyon Lake? It's way down here. And that's a big lake. So who's using that water? This is the growth in municipal demand. Strictly cities in the state of Texas are going to use that much water, and it's going to grow 11.5 canyon lakes over the next 50 years. Remember I said we're not going to build but maybe 1 more lake, and it won't be the size of Canyon Lake. So we've got to save water. Well, who's helping us? How many people are in here are interested in agriculture and irrigation? Okay, good. You'll be happy to know that the agricultural industry in the state of Texas is figuring out ways to save water. They're going to drip irrigation in row crops. So the day's coming where you won't flood irrigate a cotton field. You'll have drip emitters on every cotton plant in that field. The day of the big wheeled sprinkler systems that scatter the water, they're coming to an end. So they're going to reduce it to 8.5 canyon lakes. Well, that's still a lot of water. Where does that take us now? Well, as you know, I know you got this in your training, if you have natural land that hasn't been built on, you get about half of that water percolating into the ground. Oh, you get about 10% runoff. But when you start building developments, housing developments, expanding cities, adding roads, you change the nature of the water retention, you flip it. Now you only get about 15% going in the ground, which is what you used to have as the runoff. Now you get over 50% runoff, and that's why we have flash floods. Well, one reason we have flash floods. We do have a lot of natural stone that contributes to that. So we are trying to talk to the folks that are behind building, and we're trying to sell a change in people's thinking. We're trying to create the environment that it's better to do rainwater harvesting than to do a well. Now, I live right there. That well is just a little over a mile from my house. That's a monitoring well. Nobody's drawing water from it. They just simply measure the depth of the water every hour with a radar unit that bounces a signal off the bottom of the well, off the surface of the water. This is what that looks like since 1998. This is where the water was. This is where the water is. And when you do a regression through that data, and it's a lot of data, so it's a pretty good curve fit, that decline is 2.5 feet a year. That means if you have a well in that neighborhood area, your well's going down with that at the same rate. And what does that allow us to do? It allows us to look out in the future and say, well, if nothing changed, if no new homes were built and we continued to decline at that consumption rate, where does that take us? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one point, and that was that when you drill, you go into the water table, ideally 100 feet, and you won't make it from that water level. Move. There you go. In 2039, that well will be dry because you won't be reaching the water if there is any water below that. So now we can predict how much stress the communities are going to have in the future. And this is not the Edwards Aquifer, this is the Trinity. And Larry's going to have a lot more to say about the Trinity later on. So we're offering you an out. It's not all gloom and doom, it just means you got to change horses. It's time to change horses and move to rainwater harvesting as your primary source for your surplus water, meaning your outdoor water, or you can go completely internal and have it for your house as well. It's all tax-free with the state of Texas. There's a form that we can provide you, and Larry will explain more about how we come out and do site visits. We're already booked for 3 people in here. Reducing your water bill is kind of a tricky thing to talk about, but here's what my take on it is. Are you familiar with the concept of take or pay? Take or pay means you buy so much water, if you don't use it, well, they get to keep it. So I pay for 4,000 gallons a month. I rarely have ever used 3,000 gallons a month, and I usually use about 2,200. So I'm paying for water that I don't use anyway off of Canyon Lake. And my savings in water bills is if I can continue to water when we're in drought conditions, and Canyon Lake says you can't water but Mondays and Thursdays, and maybe you can't only water except Mondays, and then maybe it'll get as bad as you can only water twice a week. Well, I've had to replace my landscaping twice now, and that's expensive. So I could have saved all those dollars just watering off my system. Now, some cities are actually providing rebates. The city of New Braunfels does. If you put in a 250-gallon tank, they essentially pay for it. They pay you 50 cents a gallon up to 250 bucks. I'm sorry, I got the math wrong. Don't cross-check me on that. Here's the quintessential slide for my part of the presentation. If you are thinking about buying some acreage and you want to put a well on it, this is about what it will cost you and about how deep you'd have to go. As an alternative, you can do rain catchment for almost the same amount of money. In fact, you may save money. And your reliability in the long haul increases your property value. It's not an issue today, but it's going to be an issue soon. So we're trying to do this paradigm shift with people who are building new homes. Don't put a well in, do rainwater harvesting instead. And the people that we're talking to, we want to get the bankers on board that you can roll a rainwater harvesting system into your mortgage just like you roll a well. We're also trying to get the builders to sell the idea to the homeowners, hey, you need to build in your rainwater harvesting system when you're building. That's the cheapest way to do it. It's hard to do afterwards, relatively speaking. And the beneficiaries are you and me. We get to benefit from having better water and more of it. Now I'm going to have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, Dr. Larry Sun. You have the calm.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen. I am with the Comal Trinity Groundwater Conservation District. I'm the secretary, and our task with the Groundwater Conservation District is to reach out to the public and let you know the situation that we have. We're not trying to be alarmist, but I think in some degree, we need to be alarmed at where we are in terms of rainwater and in terms of the water table that we have in the Trinity. The Trinity is not like the one that you hear on the news every evening. You hear about the aquifer level. That's the Edwards Aquifer. That's not the Trinity. The Edwards are big buckets of caves of water that we have over on the east side of the county. The Trinity is underneath the entire county, including the Edwards. Where it gets to the Balcones Fault, it goes underneath the Edwards over there. But it's a very slow-moving aquifer. It starts at Oklahoma at the Red River, comes all the way down here to San Antonio, Doglegs all the way out to Ozona. So sometimes when I say that, people say, well, if it's raining in Dallas, we ought to get water here. We don't. We get the water that falls here, and that water takes a long time to get to the water table. 3 years. The rain that fell today, if you want to get it out of your well, it'll take 3 years to get that water down deep enough so that you can be able to take and pump it back out. So I get to talk about some rather interesting stuff. I get to talk about the systems themselves. When you put together a system, what does the system look like if you're going to do a rainwater harvesting system? Typically, we have two general uses of it. Either we're using it for agriculture and animals such as this, or we're using it for our household use. I have a household use system. Stephen has a household use system, and we also go and use our rainwater for us watering our various plants and animals also. No matter which of the systems that you are going to be looking at, they have three basic components. That which is the storage tank, and anything that happens before the storage tank, and everything that happens after the storage tank. So I'd like to start out by talking about the pre-tank process. We want to filter the water or screen the water as best we can before it gets to the tank. And a couple of ways of doing it. First thing we can have is rain guards on top of our rain gutters. It does not have to be the real fine stuff that the water has difficulty getting through. Open weave, such as you see right there, is perfectly acceptable because we're going to have a second stage, and the second stage is over here what's called a leaf filter. And the leaf filter has a screen on it that is very similar to something that you'd have on your screen door or your window. And so that screen is going to take some particulate. It's going to fall on top of that screen that you see right there. And as it falls on that screen, it washes away and the water goes through. And that leaf filter also is going to be able to be used to help keep mosquitoes out of your system. One of the things that you want to make sure that you do is you want to seal the system so that mosquitoes don't breed in your system. The third level that we have is something that we call a sock filter, and it could really be a sock. There is a sock filter that's called a maelstrom filter that looks like this, and inside of that is basically a bag that has the density of pantyhose so that water can go through it, but the particulate that goes into it would be captured. So that thing needs to be changed periodically. I have to change mine twice a year. I have those on my system. You could also use a pair of pantyhose. Theoretically, you could just attach it to the water pipe that goes in there and let the water go through, and it will attach the particulate. And every now and again, you might have to go ahead and clean that out, basically put a new one on. But what we want to do is we want to get it down to about a 180 micron. Now, how much is that? If you were to take and yank out one hair Not you, sir. If you were to yank out one hair and then two more and put them side by side, that would be about 210 micron. One hair is 70 micron. So 180 micron is a little bit bigger than, a little smaller rather than 3 hairs, okay? So you get an idea of we are screening the water to finer and finer quantities as we get to this point. Now it's going to go inside of that particular tank. You will hear, if you do research on this, you will hear of something called first flush. And first flush is kind of a code name that says if there's no rain for a period of time, what happens is dirt, dust, and pollen and silt drop on top of your roof of your building, and maybe you might get some bird poop up there, you might get a squirrel that poops up there or whatever, and that's going to take and wash off when the first rain starts. So what happens with a lot of the theory behind first flush is that we want to capture that water and kind of put it into some sort of a pipe. And you can see that right over here. This would be a first flush pipe. The dirtiest water, if you will, falls in there. How that works in a basic situation is the dirty water comes from your roof, and as it moves along over your roof, it falls into that little trap. And there's a ball in there, and this handy dandy little ball over here starts rising to the top. And when it gets to the top like that over there, then what happens is the cleaner water bypasses it and goes into your system. Now that sounds like a really good system, and in fact, it does work, but the problem with them is they are a pain in the asparagus. And the reason why they're such a pain is because first, they are almost always undersized. For every 1,000 square feet, you need to be able to capture about 10 gallons. Let's just assume for a moment that that building that you see in that photograph is 1,000 square feet. So now the water is going to drop into this little first flush pipe, which is this part right here. This part right down here at the bottom, that's a 3-inch pipe, and it holds less than ½ a gallon per foot. And so if we are able to collect maybe 3 gallons or 4 gallons, we'd be lucky. So one of the problems is they are terribly undersized, and therefore they don't work very well. The other thing is every time you have a downspout, you've got to have one of these things. And that means that somebody, you, has to go out and open up that valve on all 10 of them if you have 10 downspouts, and that becomes kind of a pain. Now, some people will expand the size of it by having several larger tubes like you see right here, or in this case, a 6-inch pipe that you see right over there. But the problem with that is water is very heavy. And so because it's heavy, you will have things like, you see that bracket up there is already starting to fail because that water pipe is so heavy. So when we talk about first flush, a first flush system is a good system, and it can function if it's big enough. There's a second system that is a first flush system that's called a tank system. This is what I have. In a tank system, what happens is the water comes out. There's something called a wet system and a dry system. And basically, if the tank is close to the house and the pipe is going directly to the tank, when it stops raining, the pipe is dry. We call it a dry system. If it goes down underground, pops up, and then gravity feeds the water into the tank, we call that a wet system. And so this example is a wet system where the water is going to be underground, coming up to this point, and then it's going to drop into that tank. And this tank can be any size, it doesn't matter. Mine's 500 gallons. And people will say, whoa, you're going to throw away 500 gallons. No, I don't. But I also don't need to drain it all out either. With this kind of a system, we will take and bypass, once this tank gets to some kind of a level like about that, then it bypasses and goes into my main tank. My tank is 50,000 gallons. That's way too big. You only need about maybe 25 or 30,000 for most homes. I got a 50,000 gallon tank because I had enough room to put it there, and it was the same price as a 30. So I got it. You know, so it was kind of a simple economics issue. But the point that I want to make is that if, let's suppose that we expect that there's going to be some rain maybe in 2 weeks. If that's the case, I can take the level of this tank down to about maybe there, and then just pump that much out and leave only about 200 gallons that is going to have to be cleaned off again. And if it's been 4 or 5 months, I might drain the entire tank. So this kind of a system can work, and usually people build them large enough. I have a little valve that's down here at the bottom. You see at the bottom of that tank, that valve goes over to my garden tank. I have a separate tank, and it pumps it over there to the garden tank, and inside of the garden tank, I use that to water my garden, and the plants absolutely love rainwater. You all know that already. Very little maintenance on that kind of a system, and that's the good thing about it. So if you decide that you want the first flush, I would strongly suggest this kind of a system, not the individual first flush system. Stephen on his system does not have a first flush at all. So I'm saying that because it's important that you know you don't have to have one. You can have one, and if you decide that you want to have one, this is the kind that you ought to type and look into. All right, so when we look at containers, how do we store all of this water? Well, there's everything from rain barrels to wooden ones, to metal ones, to all kinds of different kinds of canisters that you can use, some very small, some very large. Whatever you have access to and available, you can do. You can have individual small tanks, a whole bunch of them linked together as a daisy chain, and they can be used that way, or you can have a larger tank. Stephen's tank is 25,000? 30,000 gallons. And so we're looking at tanks that are fairly good size, and I'll talk a little bit about how you would determine what size you might want to have when we get there just a little bit. All right. It's very important that you understand that no matter what you're going to do to store the water, water is extremely heavy. And these 4 barrels that you see here, these 55-gallon drums, they are almost a ton. That's a tremendous amount of weight. So obviously, whatever support system you have underneath it has to be able to support that weight, and you have to worry about that falling over on youngsters. So be very careful about what you do in terms of elevation and how you secure those things so that they don't fall over. They are very, very heavy. 8 pounds, 8 1/3 pounds per gallon. All right. So then the next thing is what happens after the tank. We talked about the pre-tank screening, then we talked about the tank. So now let's go into the post-tank process, everything that happens after the tank. Almost always you will need some sort of a pump to distribute the water. And it's not because you couldn't use gravity if you have gravity, but gravity doesn't push it hard enough usually for you to have it in your home at a pressure that you want, like a shower. In addition to that, no matter how you're going about the system, you want something to be able to convey the water. Pumps push water, they never suck the water. They are pushing the water. So the first thing that you'd have is a pump. And so now you got the water that comes out of the tank and it goes over there to the pump. The next thing that's going to happen after that is you need to filter the water. So you need a filtration system. And this is kind of a typical system. This system has first a couple of pressure gauges that you see right there, and those pressure gauges are there specifically so that it tells you when you're going to have to change the 2 filters. If the second gauge starts to go down, then it's telling you that the water is clogged somewhere in those filters, and it's time to change those filters. Those 2 filters are first a 20-micron filter, and it's a pleated filter. It's just taking particulate out. And then the second one is a 5-micron filter. And the reason why we want to go to 5 micron is because if we have any pathogens in the water, as the water goes to the next step and it's swirling around inside the UV filter, if it's a larger particle than 5 microns, it's possible for pathogens to hide in the shadow and not therefore be rendered inert. So 5 micron is kind of important as we get to this point, and it can be just a particulate filter that is basically dust and dirt, or it could be a carbon filter if you wanted to get taste out of the water. Like if you have a well and you want to get the taste out, you'd use a carbon filter. You do not need to have that for rainwater because it doesn't have a taste. Now, do some people use them? Yes, they do. And so it's kind of like your choice. I don't. This is basically my system. Then after the water goes through the 5-micron filter, then it goes through a UV filter, and the UV filter will neutralize any pathogens that happens to be in the water. It doesn't really take them out. It doesn't really kill them. What it does, it makes them unable to reproduce, and therefore they are safe. So are they still in the water? Yep. Are they harmful? Nope. So what happens is by the time the water gets out of this system now and goes through there, you have pure water. And it's going to be more pure than you get from a water purveyor, truly. So what's involved in the system? That's it. That's the entire system. That's all you need. That pump right there costs about $425. That filtering system, you can buy that whole system all put together for about $1,000. So for $1,500, you have pure water. And that will run an entire household of water. Now, in my system, I added a few bells and whistles. And you can do this depending upon whether you want to or not. First, this first filter over here, this 20-micron filter, I don't want to change that all that often. I don't want to change it once every quarter. I want to change it once every 9 months. So what I have in my system is a little spin-down filter that costs about $50. And this little spin-down filter causes the water to come in, it spins around inside of here, and it goes into the little bowl that you see down here at the bottom. And then about once every month, I go out there, turn this little valve right here, and it washes all of that stuff that fell in there, and it goes away. And then this filter is going to take it down to almost 20 micron. So now when it gets to my 20 micron, I don't have very much that I have to worry about, and therefore I don't have to change it as often, and so I put that into my system. Do you have to do that? Nope. Can you do that? Yep, and it's pretty easy to do that. I also wanted to know how much water we are physically using every month, and in order to do that, I bought a little water meter, and the little water meter cost about $50. And so I put the water meter in there to tell me how much water I'm using. Now, if you're really clever and you want to take and also use rainwater in your garden, one of the things you can do is bypass that by having a little valve that you're going to put in right about over there and pump it out to your garden so that you have water that's rainwater that is not purified. You know what's really ironic? And Stephen, this is one of my favorite quotes from Stephen. What's really ironic is we spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars purifying water to drinking standards, and we dump it on the ground. Think about that for just a second. That is such a waste. And here you can take your rainwater and you can dump it on the ground, and it is there the way it is supposed to be. And your plants love it anyway. All right, so that's basically a system. Do you need all of that? No, you don't. You do need to have a pump, and you are going to have that filtration system that you see in the upper right-hand corner. All right, so how much water can we collect, and then what happens to it, and how much do I need? First, rain falls straight down. So it doesn't matter what the shape of your roof is. You don't have to calculate the hypotenuse of the right triangle in order to determine stuff, because rain comes straight down. And no matter what the shape of it is, that water is going to come straight down. And if these buildings are all the same size, no matter what the shape is, the same water will fall. So you get the same amount of water on there no matter what the shape is. Then secondarily, what we know is that for every 1 square feet of space that you have, you will gather 0.62 of a gallon of water, 0.62 for every square feet. So we start doing some quick math, we'll do the Stephen kind of thing. And I keep picking on him that way. I'm a statistician. My doctorate degree is in statistics and research, taught statistics for 25 years at the University of Redlands, go Bulldog. And so math comes easy to me too. So, but nevertheless, if you have 1,000 square feet, you can get 620 gallons of water with 1 inch of rain. We got 1/10 of an inch of rain today, by the way, only 1/10 of an inch. But for every square foot, you're going to get 0.62. And if you look at 34 inches per year, guess what? We have 21,000 gallons of water that falls on your 1,000 square feet. Now, the question that most people will ask about this point is, well, how do I calculate that for my house? The simplest way to do it, I like this little ballpark kind of figure. The simplest way to do it is if you look at that house up there, you see the dotted line. The dotted line represents the concrete slab. The little overhang that you see outside of that, that's this area that you see outside of it here, is the overhang that you have on your roof. And as a good rule of thumb, it's about 20% of the size of your roof. So all you have to do is calculate the square footage of the house that you have, including the garage and patios, and then add 20% to that. So just simply add 20%. If it's 1,700 square feet in the house that you have, multiply that by 1.2, and we have roughly 2,000 square feet. So we know that in 2,000 square feet, what we're going to be able to do is to say that with 2,000, 1 inch of rain is going to give us 1,265 gallons on that house. And in 1 year, that house is going to gather 43,000 gallons of water. That brings us to the next point, and that is, how much water do I need to have? How much do I need to store? How much do I use? And so when we talk about demand, as a general rule of thumb, people who are just using water normally, they will use approximately 50 gallons per person per day. Stephen and his wife Sheila use somewhere about 30 gallons per day because they're conservative. And I think if you're collecting water, you tend to be more conservative. Nevertheless, about 50 gallons per person per day. So if you have 3 people living in your household, you're going to need to have 150 gallons of water per day for indoor water use. This does not include any outdoor use. So then some quick math is we multiply that by 30 days, and we know that we're going to need 4,500 gallons per month for our household. So now you ask the question of yourself, how much water do I want in reserve? How much water do I want in my tank in case we have a drought? You see, and we don't have any rain. Well, if that's the case, and by the way, here in this part of Texas, we have never had a drought last longer than 87 days. Never. And so even when you look at the 2011 drought that we had, we did not have more than 87 days of water. So to be safe, we would say to you, well, you want to have at least 60 days. I suggest that you have 90 days. So if you want 90 days of reserve, it's 4,500 times. All right, we got 3 months, right? 90 days. So we got 3 months, and so that says we need to store a minimum of 13,500 gallons. We had a lady who was served on the board for many, many years at the Comal Trinity Groundwater Conservation District, and she and her husband had a 12,000 gallon tank, and they never were out of water in 40 years. Never. That's pretty amazing when you stop and think about that. And they used it totally. Now, so you need a tank that's at least 13,500 gallons. Stephen and I would come to your house and we would say, well, we'd suggest you get a 15,000 gallon tank or larger. Can you get a larger one? Yes. And the cost per gallon of storage drops exponentially as the tank gets bigger and bigger. They get cheaper literally by the gallons of water that you would store. So that particular tank that you see in the photograph is 19 feet in diameter and it's 7 feet tall. And so that's a typical tank. My tank is 39 feet in diameter, 7 feet tall. All right, so let's talk a little bit about outdoor use. How do you calculate how much water I'm using outdoors? Well, you're probably on a water system. So the first thing that you can do is go and read the meter. All you have to do is go out and look at the number that's on the meter. You have a number. Then put your entire system, run every sprinkler through one cycle. So now here's your house, and here are your various sprinklers, and we water everything through one full cycle. After we finish with that, then we go back to the meter and we look at the meter and we read the meter again, and whatever the difference is, that's how many gallons you have used. And so let's just suppose in this case that we have used 1,920 gallons in one sprinkler process, you see, full system. Now the next question is, how often do you do that every week, you see? So you'd say, well, I do that twice a week. So now we multiply that number of gallons times 2, and that's going to give us that we are going to use 3,800 gallons per week, or 184,000 gallons in a year. That's an amazing amount of water that's been treated to drink standards. It scares me. It just scares me when I think about that. All right. So part of the reason why Stephen and I do this is we are trying to help take stress off the Trinity aquifer. And one of the ways of doing that is to collect rainwater, any amount of rainwater. It doesn't really matter how much it is. It doesn't matter if you want just rain barrels. It doesn't matter if you want a large system. But the idea is, if we can get you to do some of your watering, particularly your outside watering, by using some sort of a rain catchment system, it allows for taking some of the stress off the Trinity aquifer. This little map of Comal County shows all of the various houses or places that Steve and I have gone to try to help people decide what they need for the system. And folks, we do that without charge. It's a public service from the Master Gardeners, and I thank you very much for having him, and from the Comal Trinity Groundwater Conservation District. It's one of the reasons why I'm one of the directors, because we need to touch people. We need to tell them what we have in terms of reality. And so it is absolutely without charge. You'll see one spot over there, this spot right there, that has a number 10 in it. That's where my house is. And I've had 10 people come to my house to view my system, to see what the system looks like, to see all of the setup, so that they can decide whatever they want in their system. And I invite you to my home to show you that. Anytime you want to take and come. Truly, you can come to my home and do that. I live over on Highway 46, just south of, 4 miles west of Highway 281. We do that free. We will come to your house. You can come to our house, and we will try to help you to be able to decide whatever you might need for your system. And so about this time, what I usually do is open it up for questions, and hopefully we haven't made you feel like that. But Stephen and I will try to answer questions that you might have about rainwater catchment, anything that we do. And by the way, if you're a member of another group someplace and you would like us to come and address that group and speak about this same stuff, we will talk about this anytime, anywhere, whenever you want us. And it doesn't have to be Comal County. If you're in a surrounding county, you're over at Gillespie or Kendall, fine, we'll come there. In fact, we're going to Seguin, aren't we?
We're going to Guadalupe County. Next month, on the 17th, we'll be speaking at the Guadalupe Master Gardener Association.
This is, yes, sir, I'll get it in just a second. This is our this is our website address, but please give us 4 days before that becomes active, because we're switching over from an alphabet, big URL that we used to have. And so we changed to Rain Bees yesterday. And so, question over there, sir.
I was just curious how far away your storage tank is from your home.
Excellent question. Question is, how far away is my storage tank from my home? And I'll have Stephen answer that with his. I have two structures. I have two structures that are my potable water, and they total 8,000 square feet, a guest house and a main house, and they are approximately 60 feet from the roof of the closest building to where my tank is. The farthest is about 110 feet. All that water that moves through that system moves through it dynamically. It works with the water seeking its own level. So if the water falls in here, it's going to come out over here just because it's going down in the function of water. He's a hydrologist, I'm a statistician, I don't know that stuff. Your tank separates.
My distance is about 100 feet, 120 feet at max.
So he's about 120 feet, and he's off camera. The camera is over there, so I need to get him over here. So we're on this camera right over here, so thank you for that question. More, please. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering about HOA approval.
Great question. HOAs, what about HOAs and getting their approval? First, an HOA cannot stop you from capturing rainwater. What they can do is ask you to take and shield your tank in some way, and that's usually what happens. They ask you to take and put stone around it or put a fence around it, but they cannot stop you from gathering the rainwater. And they're the same thing with composting. Those of you who compost, the state law also restricts HOAs from prohibiting composting. You can compost, state law. Yes, sir.
One thing for us with our 550 gallon tanks, they did require a limestone line to cover it to keep it from the road. So there may be some HOA restrictions, but not for the actual having of it, but the aesthetics of it.
That's right.
The gentleman's comment was that his HOA required a limestone shield basically in front of it in order to protect it. And you know, in some neighborhoods, I really can't fight that. I think that where we live in some areas, that's a good thing. It helps keep the property values of everybody up. So I would ask you not to fight that, to live with it, whatever it happens to be, and then go with it rather than go loggerheads about it. Don't do that.
I'm thinking out maybe 15, 20 years. Today, that's the case. But I think in the future, people are going to say, wow, that house has got a rain tank. And it's going to be an asset that people readily recognize from the road. And they say, let's see if that one goes on the market. I'd like to get that one. I think it's going to be a pride of ownership thing at some point in the future, that you have some self-sufficiency with regard to your own water. The day's coming. Won't be tomorrow, but it's coming.
Those are our phone numbers if you'd like to take and copy them down. And I noticed that some of you were taking pictures of the slides as we were going through. On our website, 4 days from now, the entire presentation will be there and you can download it. It's public information. We share it with you. We hope that you will use it. If you want to steal it, please do that. We wanted to get information out to people. I had two questions in the back. I'll go to that lady first right there. Yes, ma'am.
On the presentation, does it include y'all speaking, or is it just the slides? One that's going to be on your website.
Well, Bethany is videotaping us, and so we're hoping that the video comes through, and if it does, we'll post that video. We did this once before, and the technology kind of got away from us, but we're hoping that this one we can. So yes, we hope it'll be with the speaking.
At the minimum, it'll be on the Comal Master Gardeners website.
Cool. And those of you who get either the Bulverde Front Porch News, you get the Canyon Lake Living or Spring Branch Neighbors. If you get any of those magazines, there's an article that we write every month that goes to those publications, and they put them in there every single month. So you can kind of keep up with what's happening if you get any of those publications. I saw some more hands in the back.
Are the forms, the tax forms, and everything on the website?
I believe so.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's just a state tax form. It's a tax exemption form. You can go onto the state tax website and get it, and it's page 2. There's a 2-page item. It's only page 2. That's all you need. And so basically, to get your tax exemption, all you do is you fill out that paper, and you can kind of put in a generic, this is for water catchment, and you buy your product, whatever the product might be, and it is sales tax exempt all year long. And that includes anything that is part of the system. It includes the rain gutters, it includes the leaf shields, it includes the piping, even the labor. So everything that's anything to do with rainwater catchment, the state has a sales tax exemption on it. Thank you, great question. Yes, ma'am.
What's the process for retrofitting rainwater into your home? So basically replacing rainwater or replacing the water that's coming from the city with rainwater.
Right, it's a tie-in. You've got a water line that comes from your meter at the street. Somewhere on that linkage, you simply are going to cut into that line and tie in your rainwater system. And you have to make sure that you're not sharing those systems, because state law prohibits a direct connection from your private water system to the public water system. It has to be an air gap. So when you decide that if you want to go completely independent, you have to sever that line and leave it capped. Yeah.
The question, to kind of redo that for just a second, the question was, how do you connect your rain catchment system into a water system that you ought to have? The first thing is that the water purveyor must be notified before you can do that. They have to know that you're doing that, and then, as much as I hate to say it, you have to have a master plumber make the connection, which includes the air gap. And it's not that you can't make the connection, but you can make the connection, but the water purveyor, for public safety, simply needs to know that, you see? And then that air gap allows their system to stay sterile without having a contamination from our systems, if you will. So it's not that somebody is prohibiting that you do that, but you do have to let's say, Canyon Lake know if you're on Canyon Lake water, and you must have a master plumber make that connection. You don't have to do all of the other pipe, but that connection must be done by them. Yes, sir.
On that deal, do you have a dual system then?
No, you just have one pipe. So what happens is you have a pipe that's going into your house, you get a valve on it. So what happens is you go into that pipe someplace below that valve and just tee off. But there has to be an air gap there at that tee. So it's not a dual system, it's just a dual supply at that input point to your house.
So you can either do one or the other.
Yeah.
Right. That's if you're talking about tapping in or disconnecting from a municipal system. But let's suppose, like in Larry's case, he has a well that was there before he bought his home. He's able to use that well water too, so he has a live connection between the well and his rainwater system. If it's your well, it's your water, you can do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are getting, we have an hour, so we have just 2 minutes left. Yes, sir, way in the back.
If I wanted to paint my roof, I have to have a NSF 61 paint. Do you know where you can get an NSF 61 certified paint?
I don't. The question is asked is, if you want to paint your roof, you need an NS 51.
National Sanitation Foundation system.
Oh, yeah, you need a special paint so that it doesn't have lead in it. That's one of the main portions of it. Paint today, very, very little of the paint we get nowadays is lead-based, but nevertheless, that whatever paint you might need in order to paint a roof, you want to make sure that it is going to be able to be used with potable water. Same thing with storage tanks, by the way. If you want to take and put it in those 350-gallon totes, or you want to put it in water barrels, you want to make sure that those are food grade or at least a safe grade container, like something that had soap in it before, as an example, is okay. But you have to wash it out. It takes a long time to get that soap out. But nevertheless, you want to make sure that those containers are going to be food grade. And with that,
Okay, if there's not any more questions, are there not any more questions? I do want to make one comment because it's often asked after the meeting. If we collect this rainwater, do we hurt the recharge to the aquifers? Well, let me tell you that Comal County is 525 square miles. And the rain, that seasonal rain, 32 to 34 inches, falling on 525 square miles, that's 2.5 canyon lakes of rainwater. That's how much water is raining here. So no, you're not hurting the aquifers by capturing some of the rainwater.
thank you very much for allowing us to do this. Again, if you have any kind of a, thank you. If you are a member of another group and you'd like us to come in to speak, feel free to give us a call. We would be very happy to do that.